But perhaps more than these Vulcan, scaly, or stinky monsters, this archipelago is known for its insects. Insects were Wallace's true love. Wallace spent most of his time pursuing beetles, butterflies, and other arthropods. He loved it. Catching a large butterfly species would cause him to, quote, tremble with excitement. Of one particularly good specimen, he wrote, "On taking it out of my net and opening the glorious wings, my heart began to beat violently, and blood rushed to my head. I had a headache the rest of the day." As best I can tell, his record for collecting was catching over 95 species of beetle in a single day. 95 species. In another part of his travelogue, he was basing himself out of the same hut, staying put for over 2 months, over the course of which he had already collected over 800 species of beetle. But even after those 2.5 months, one day he still managed to find 32 new species. But it turns out that even insects can be monstrous in Indonesia, and the most memorable creepy crawly for me was the tailless whip scorpions of Flores, often called whip spiders, scientifically referred to as the amphipygids, meaning blunt rump. Amphipygids have no silk or venomous glands. They have only 3 pairs of walking legs, whereas other arachnids have 4. The 4th pair, for them, has been modified into these long sensory organs. They also have these pincer-like pedipalps, which are these sinister-looking things in the front of their faces that they use to reach out and grab cave insects with. We found this guy in a cave in Flores, the same trip to visit the Komodo Dragons. This species, it turns out, was not described by science until 2002. It belongs to a genus that was thought to exist only in Central and Southern America. Moving on to primates. Although there are dozens of species in the archipelago, I'm only going to touch on 3. First, up in North Sulawesi, Wallace's favorite, the black macaque. I stumbled upon a troop of these during one of my walks, and in my excitement, I forgot the number 1 rule of making a monkey's acquaintance, which is never look a monkey in the eye. But I stared unabashedly, and jaw-dropped in wonder, and this guy, the alpha male, walked up to me and punched me right in the arm. I can tell you, black macaques are strong. Next, the adorable and freakish tarsier. It is the lone genus in the lone family and the lone infraorder of primata, the Tarsiiformes. It has been evolving independently of other primates for over 45 million years. They are the only entirely carnivorous primates, eating only insects and birds. They are named for their extremely long tarsus bones of their legs. Their legs are over twice as long as their torso. Each eyeball is as large as their entire brain. Indonesia is also home of the orangutan. It resides only on the islands of Sumatra and Borneo. I made 2 trips to Borneo for the purpose of seeing this great ape while they are still around. Accessing its habitat required a variety of modes of transportation, from plane to boat to driving to hitchhiking when the roads got too bad. As you can see here, the ruts get pretty deep in Borneo. It takes a lot of work to find the orangutan, and it's only going to get harder. Borneo is in the throes of a lawless mining and logging rush, and has been for decades. We'd fly over landscapes of mountaintop removal and drive for hours past burning forests. In Indonesia, making national parks out of biogems rarely does much to protect them. In the last 25 years, for instance, half of Borneo's protected lowland forests have been logged. The numbers for the unprotected forests are, of course, much worse. The orangutan's population is currently 14% of what it was before World War II. In South Kalimantan, we traveled for a day upriver to an orangutan research and rehabilitation center in the national park called Tanjung Puting. We saw many wild orangutans feeding in the trees above the riverbank, and many taking advantage of feed stations set out by the rehab center. And here's my token shot of a cute orangutan baby. Moving on. I also had the honor of meeting Tom, the local population's alpha male. Tom was enormous, a dominant jerk. He barged into the camp, and many of the researchers ran for their dorm rooms. Tom walked up to the kitchen, ripped open the door, and served himself a glass of water. Then he sat down and drank it, holding the glass in his foot. There's me right behind him for scale. After finishing his drink, he grabbed a nearby female out of a tree, mated with her, then walked off into the forest. Tom made Wallace's depiction of the old man of the forest more believable for me. As I said, orangutans are not doing well. As you can see from this dramatically colored figure, if current deforestation trends continue, there will not be any orangutan habitat in 20 years, and therefore no orangutans. 20 years. And as I said, there's more stacked against the old man of the forest than logging. There's mining, slash-and-burn agriculture, palm oil plantations, poaching, and illegal trade, to name a few things. That same list of threats also applies to the next marvel of Indonesia, the birds of paradise. My first encounter with a bird of paradise was at a conference in Jakarta, when an enthusiastic Papuan plopped this hat made from a greater bird of paradise on my head. I vowed, as Wallace as my witness, to see a living specimen of these birds before I exited the country. Indonesia has 20% of the world's bird species, and the birds of paradise are among the most spectacular. Wallace called them one of the most beautiful and most wonderful of all living things. Even in the 19th century, they were rare. After searching for months, Wallace was only able to find 5 species. We now know there are at least 40 species in 13 genera, and they are all weird. I made it one of the final expeditions of my year to find a bird of paradise. They are restricted to Australasia, east of the Latticker's Line. I set my sights on one of the most remote species, found only on the mythical Aru Islands. I was after the greater bird of paradise, the one from that hat in Jakarta, Paradisea apoda, in Indonesian, Cendrawasih. Composed of 84 different islands, Aru was one of Wallace's favorite places he had been in his 8 years of collecting. It took a few flights and overnight ferry rides to arrive in Aru's main port of Dobo, and from there we convinced the police to grant us the 4-hour passage upriver to a small village, where we convinced the chief to allow us into the forest. He agreed under the condition that we pay for a 3-man escort, who would show us the way to the birds. These men could not understand that we did not want to shoot the birds of paradise, just watch them. Oh, I'm the one on the right there. The only food our escorts brought was a kilo of rice for a 5-day hike, so often we had to make a choice between eating a substantive meal and leaving the bird we saw in peace. Aru pigeon species became a staple. One day we stumbled upon a band of spear hunters who traded us some tree kangaroo jerky for some of our rice. They also had in their possession an orphaned baby couscous, an arboreal marsupial only found east of the Latticker's Line. Knowing he would soon become a meal in their care, we managed to barter for the couscous as well, and he soon became the mascot of our expedition. Naturally, we named him Wallace. Wallace the person had written of display grounds where birds of paradise congregate in mass numbers to perform courtship displays. While hunting and deforestation has made it so that nothing like this could ever happen again, we did finally find a hill where a few birds were gathered. To do so, we had to search a number of hilltops, all of them crawling with leeches before we were successful. It was one of the most exhilarating successes of my year.
We're in the nesting ground of a greater bird of paradise. If you listen, they might make their call.
Amid my shakes of wonder, I had to beg our guide not to shoot the displaying bird, and insist that we just wanted rice that night for dinner. We returned to Dobo soon after, and that night I read these words in Wallace's memoirs. The village of Dobo held that evening at least one contented man.